There will be 17 players present at the NFL draft in Green Bay starting on Thursday, April 24th, 2025. And there's a really good chance of the 17 players in attendance, the Cleveland Browns will end up with two of them. We'll talk about it. Browns 3D starts. Welcome back, my friends, to the show that never ends, your daily delivery of all things dog pound. Browns 3D on the OBR is brought to you by State Sharpening More Sales and Service. I am your host, Jeff Lloyd. We appreciate everybody who's been coming out in the weeks and months here of the NFL draft coverage, of course, free agency on the OBR, pouring out to read all the written content every day, coming out in rows nightly for the nightly streaming content here on the OBR, of course, on YouTube, the OBR, of course, over on Twitch. Again, your support means a ton. We appreciate it. Spend the draft with us Thursday night, Friday, Saturday. We will be streaming the entirety of the 2024 NFL draft here. So if you need a little break, you can still have the TV on. You got your phone. You certainly got, your iPad, your computer. Join us here for the coverage of the 2025 NFL draft. Hopefully, to be a momentous draft for the Cleveland Browns. The list is now finalized, and there will be 17 players in attendance at the 2025 NFL draft. And as I opened with, there's a good chance the Cleveland Browns could walk out of this with two of these players, two players of the 17 on the list. Of course, you have Tyler Booker, guard from Alabama, fantastic prospect. Jahad Campbell, linebacker from Alabama. He is a player people really, really like. Um, Coming off surgery right now in the rehab process, but still a top prospect in his class. Offensive tackle Will Campbell from LSU. Of course, my guy Abdul Carter from Penn State. Jaxson Dart will be in attendance. Matthew Golden, wide receiver from Texas. Mason Graham, defensive tackle from Michigan. Unicorn Travis Hunter. I'm going to get to Travis Hunter in a little bit. Ashton Jeanty, running back from Boise State. Will Johnson, the corner from Michigan. Ted McMillan, wide receiver, Arizona, who many didn't know. And actually, this just came out last night. There was nothing that we had heard, in regards to the Cleveland Browns and Ted McMillan on the top 30 visit. We certainly reached out, within, Slack channel last night. Nobody from the LBR had known about this up until it was released from Jordan Schultz yesterday. But Ted McMillan was, in fact, a Cleveland Browns top 30 draft visit. Quarterback Jalen Milroe, offensive tackle John Simmons from Ohio State, safety, a good one, Malachi Starks from the University of Georgia, Kamar Stewart, D end, Texas A&M, Cam Ward, of course, will be there, expected to go number one overall to the Tennessee Titans, and defensive end Mikael Williams from the University of Georgia. Now, certainly a lot of talk for the Browns is around two, and certainly around, the Travis Hunter, Abdul Carter. We're not debating that right now, but the Browns most likely going to leave with one of those two players. Certainly the Browns highly, highly connected to quarterbacks, well, any quarterback, honestly, right? But quarterback Jaxson Dart, and of course, quarterback Jalen Milroe from Alabama. So, of these 17 players who will be in attendance, there is a really solid chance, in my opinion, the Cleveland Browns will walk out with Hunter Carter, one of the two, Dart Milroe, one of the two. Hence, the Browns getting two players in this draft from this list of 17 who will be in attendance. Um, Shador Sanders, and like I'm not going to do this anymore. My feelings on his play, have nothing, to do with this. Look, Shador Sanders has said from jump that he is not attending the draft. He plans to, take in the entire experience with his family. Um, did not change his stance. Travis Hunter was one originally who said he was not going to attend the draft, but I guess now at this point he has chosen to do so. So, I'm not going to, put any more, on Shador Sanders. He said what he said from Jump Street, and he said he was not going to attend. And, to this point, that is still the path that Shador has chosen to take. He will not attend the draft. Um, Whether or not this reflects on where they think they're going, it's none of that. But, this is what they said from Jump, and I'm assuming from Jump, the Sanders camp thought they were probably going to go pretty high in this draft. Possibly number two. And I think, I believe there was, some from the Sanders camp that wanted the Cleveland Browns and Shador Sanders to remain to be connected because, it kept his name out there as being, someone thought of as who was going to go extremely high in this draft. As we've learned and, pretty much been talking about since the combine ended, it seems that, the Browns and the likelihood of Shador Sanders at number two was over quickly. The interest that the Browns still may have in Shador Sanders, that's something that nobody's going to divulge at this point. Maybe they are interested. Maybe it's a player they want to get later in the first round. Maybe it's a player they have targeted for 33. I'm going to tell you right now, there are people I trust in the evaluation process who do not have Shador Sanders as the number two quarterback in this class. So, I mean, to take that information from what you will, but Shador Sanders is not necessarily universally, in Sharpie as the number two quarterback in this class. Um, and for Sanders, who knows? I mean, now you have the Giants going out there again, which really surprises me. And because this is the part that I think is a little bit confusing in regards to, where teams all by now you're done. I mean, your board should be set. And we talked about this at the time. The New York Giants were present at every Colorado game this year in one way, shape, or another, whether it was in, Boulder, whether it was on the road, it was a running storyline. And certainly with everyone I've spoken to, that the New York Giants basically were just following the Colorado Buffaloes around all fall. And certainly went to, the pro day and, one of the more highly publicized pro days probably in NFL history, certainly that Colorado pro day a couple weeks ago. But the Giants didn't have that. I mean, they brought, the front office, they brought the coaching staff, I mean, brought secretaries, right? I mean, you name it, the New York Giants brought it. So the fact that now they're going out there this late in the process one more time for a workout certainly is interesting to me. Like I don't know what they expect that Sanders is going to do at this point in the process of a private workout. That's either going to tip the scales for them, positively, where they just say, you know what, that's it. It should do at three. I don't care. This is the way we're going to do it. Or, you know what, we're positive. It's not him at three. Like that whole thing just really seemed really strange this late in the process. Shador's going to have to obviously, find a couple of guys to catch some balls from him, unless the Giants bring somebody with them. I don't even know how that would work. But, Shador's going to have to ask probably for a personal favor. He's got a bunch of wide receivers. I doubt Travis Hunter is going to do it. But, certainly with Shepard and, Wester, and, there was a bunch of wide receivers on that Colorado team who will somehow factor, not necessarily in the draft, but maybe in the UDFA process, and certainly will be in training camps this fall in the NFL. Um, Again, it's just a real head scratcher for me because I just don't know what the Giants think they're going to find or see after spending the entirety of the college football season watching him up close, certainly following intently through the process, certainly being a, main attendee at the Colorado Pro Day. So all of this to me is it's a little bit head scratching. And, and the other thing is if this is some sort of attempt from the New York Giants to maybe get a team to trade up for him, I don't know. I mean, it seems a little disingenuous this late in the process. I mean, this should certainly be from the New York Giants standpoint that, you know what, they are so on the fence as to whether or not Shador is worthy of their number three selection, that they just want to A, go one more time and make sure, or B, A, we're not sure on this. I'm not sure on this. I just want to see him throw the ball one more time. Because if this is a lure from the Giants to try to, get somebody to trade up, kind of feels like Shador Sanders is kind of being, basically used like, like an animal in the circus. It just doesn't seem fair at this point. Um, and certainly for Shador, this has been an extremely, extremely difficult process. When your father is as highly touted as his is, and I have equated this, anybody, who's new to the show or didn't, catch this, I've kind of equated Shador Sanders a little bit to Bronny James. I mean, there is so much more on these kids, positively or negatively, which necessarily is not fair to them. Everyone should be evaluated for who they are, but it certainly wasn't the case for Bronny James. It's certainly not the case for Shador Sanders. It'll most likely not be the case, maybe not next draft cycle, but the draft cycle after for Marsh Manning. It's really difficult for these kids. And look, these kids have had to manipulate their entire lives whether it's Bronny James being LeBron James's son, Shador being Dion's son, of course, Arch being part of the legendary quarterback family of the NFL and the Mannings. It's difficult enough for these kids basically just to walk around and wear that name on their back. But, I think at some point it gets a little bit too far. And, it certainly makes, things 10 times harder for kids that are just trying to find their way and, make their mark in their sport. So, for that, I'm a little tired of it. I'm honestly a little bit over it. And I kind of feel bad, certainly for Shador, certainly the way I felt for Bronny James, and, certainly what could possibly happen, for, you know, Arch Manning in the years to come. This is Brown's 3D. We will continue, and we appreciate you all for sticking around. We've been talking now, and the relationship has been great. State Sharpening Mower Sales and Service in Broadview Heights. If you are local to the Cleveland area, they're your one-stop shop for all things lawn equipment. Look, is there anything worse than missing Browns games because you've got lawn chores to do? State has the best lineup of new up-to-date mowers to cut your mowing time down, as well as genuine parts and expert factory-trained technicians to get your existing mower back into peak shape. Whether you're in the market for the state-of-the-art Ultima Zero Turn or the top dog Enduro Series tractor, let State Sharpening and Tough Cadet help you keep your weekend yours. They're veteran-owned. The Kane family are lifetime Clevelanders. They are lifetime Browns fans, and they're proud supporters of all of us here at the OBR. Again, if you are local to Cleveland, State Sharpening your sales and service in Broadview Heights is your hometown team for all your lawn equipment needs. All their info is at statesharp.com. That is STATESHARP.com. Jeff Lloyd, Browns 3D on the OBR streaming networks. Make sure you subscribe to the OBR on YouTube. Of course, you make sure you're subscribed to the OBR over on Twitch. Um, this one's a little bit interesting. And in regards to Travis Hunter, and basically Hunter made it sound like he seems a little bit displeased if there are teams out there who maybe aren't willing to embrace him being a guy who plays on both sides of the ball. Um, First for Hunter, I think he needs to understand what he did this past fall was absolutely special. And it's one of the things, and I've said it many times, that I think is not going to get the respect and recognition it does. Yes, he won the Heisman, of course. But what he did this year and the level of excellence he had on both sides of the ball. And we've talked about it. There were players in the past who kind of moonlighted at this. Champ Bailey years ago at Georgia, Charles Woodson, Michigan, just some phenomenal guys who were able to play some offense. Certainly not to the number of snaps that Travis Hunter did, certainly not being able to play as a full-time number one corner, a full-time number one wide receiver. Nobody's really had the, success like that Travis Hunter did. But when I said from jump, and I really stated this early in the process, what was going to be difficult with Travis Hunter is basically you were going to have to make up your mind. Not necessarily him, but NFL teams. Because even if you were to try to do this in the NFL, and I just don't think there's going to be a lot of teams who are going to let him do it. Now, look, let's be honest. Yeah, he's 6 feet, a little under 6'1", 188 pounds. He ain't playing at 188 pounds, guys. I'm sorry. My opinion is Travis Hunter's probably playing closer to 180 than he's playing to 188. Um, so to put that body type out there and expect him to just be able to go out and give you, 90, 100 snaps in the NFL, 17 games a year, it's just preposterous. And the other thing is, even if you were to do it and say he excelled and he was really good, what happens when he gets dinged up? Now you're down one of your top two cornerbacks. Now you're down one of your top two wide receivers. Again, this would all depend on what team he was playing for. It would be an absolutely brutal blow to lose him if he was that significant for your team on both sides of the ball. The other thing is for him to take a next step as a player, he's not going to be able to, you know, dual threat his way through here. The NFL, it is very structured as far as when you were in the building, team meetings, practice, and when you're out of the building. I mean, this is what it is when you work for a union. You are protected. So even if he volunteers his time, it doesn't necessarily mean that staffers are going to stay around and say, well, I'll catch him up on all the stuff from the cornerback meeting because he wasn't there, or I'll catch him up from all the wide receiver stuff, because he wasn't there. And, for a young kid who's just, going to be going to a city, starting his professional life, starting his real life, and for what it looks like for Travis Hunter, starting his married life, you're asking an awful lot of the young man. The other thing, and now if he is going to reach the top echelon of what he could be as a corner or what he could be as a wide receiver, it's time to kind of put one of them to bed because it's going to have to be all about being a wide receiver. And in this case, we'll make it in regards to the Cleveland Browns. It's going to all 110% be about being the best receiver he can be. If you were drafting Travis Hunter with the number 2 or overall selection, and again, wide receivers who have gone that high in the NFL, the list is bananas. Number 2 overall since 2000, of course, contains the name of Calvin Johnson and contains the name of Charles Rogers. For those of you who don't remember, Michigan State, Detroit Lions burnt himself out easily. Calvin Johnson, absolutely one of the greatest wide receivers who has ever lived. Wide receivers who have gone number 3 overall since 2000. Braylon Edwards, and I know it certainly brings, some issues for Browns fans, of course, but did accumulate over 5,000 receiving yards within his time within the NFL. The other two wide receivers who were who drafted 3 overall since 2000, Larry Fitzgerald, Hall of Famer, and Andre Johnson, Hall of Famer. So for the Browns, who have stated publicly they view Travis Hunter as a wide receiver, if they are to spend this high of a selection on Hunter, they want the Hall of Fame turnout, which means I don't want you splitting your time. I want you 110% focused on being a wide receiver. And, I again, we don't know the gist of how this was said from Travis Hunter. And I'm sure there's a huge part of him inside that says, this is who I am. This is what makes me me. But you're going to have to adapt here a little bit. And, you're going to become a guy. And I'm not going to say that there's not going to be times, where maybe the Browns are in a pinch and, maybe, 2 corners, got a little dinged up and they're not 100% and you throw Hunter out there. Or you don't say to Hunter, hey, here it is, a Hail Mary attempt or, last drive of the game for the opposing team. And, hey, go just play the middle third of the field and, find me the ball because, you got great ball skills, obviously. But, if you're taking him, you understand what his production last year was at Colorado. It's great, but you expect that to be even higher within the NFL. And the only real expectation you would think if I am the team drafting him is he can't give me more unless this is his only focus. And it's not like he's distracted, and certainly not like, mind wise, he's certainly not capable of it. But it's really just about putting too much expectation on one's plate and maybe dinging up the investment you have, which would certainly be the case for the Browns. This is a really difficult spot for them to be in. If they are going to draft him number 2 overall, and they are going to draft him as a full-time wide receiver, Travis needs to embrace it and just go and do his business. And, Again, you don't know the tone in which it was said, because this is my biggest issue with anything nowadays in this world of text messages and posts and da 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 social media. There is no tone in anything. So it is extremely difficult to understand how it was said. Was it said truthfully? Was it said jokingly? You don't know with that type of stuff. But Travis Hunter, who is most likely going to be drafted number two, number three overall, and is going to be handed a boatload of guaranteed money. Travis, you played both ways. You worked your butt off for everything to get to this opportunity. Just say, thank you, sir, and start depositing checks and go out and be the best pro that you can possibly be. Browns 3D continues. Browns 3D continues. We appreciate all the support here. Make sure you're checking out the OBR for the written content all day long. And of course, joining us here nightly for the streaming on the OBR streaming network, OBR on YouTube, OBR on Twitch, starting every night at 6 o'clock. Browns 3D. Today being Tuesday, you'll have the React after me. Of course, Brad Ward, Pete Smith. And then following that, you will get Garage Beers with Mike Keefe. And I don't think there's anybody who has more fun doing shows or talking Cleveland sports, certainly, than Mr. Mike Keefe. Um, the Browns, and I've talked about this for a couple of years, and it's really surprised me the lack of interest in the tight end position for the Cleveland Browns. And part of the reason it surprises me, and it's not like I'm looking to move on from David Njoku. You see the success that David Njoku has. You see how well this offense performs when David Njoku performs well. Everything else seems to fall in line. And I mentioned this again, when David is dinged up or David, God forbid, misses a little time, all of a sudden, this Browns offense is, kind of like a turtle. It just crawls back into its shell. So why the emphasis has never been, to pursue the tight end, and get another guy like David in here baffles me, honestly. Um, but they've certainly been loud with their interest in adding a tight end, whether it was bringing in and meeting with Harold Fannin. Of course, they met with Bronson Arroyo, who I'm Bronson Arroyo, stupid pitcher from the Red Sox playing his guitar, Elijah Arroyo. And now Mason Taylor currently in town. Now, Fannin, I think, is a little bit different than the rest. I think Fannin could kind of give you like some interesting H-back type of stuff. Certainly was a D lineman earlier in his career. So, I mean, I know, Browns fans, and I know how much most of y'all love your fullback types. So, if you wanted somebody to maybe give you some fullback type things, I think you could maybe get that out of Fannin. And it would certainly just be another way to utilize him on the field where certainly could keep, the defense at bay, not necessarily knowing what's coming. Could put his hand in the dirt and line up behind the quarterback, obviously block a little bit for the running back, could contribute in short yardage that way. Certainly could line up off the hip of the tackle or line up off the hip of David Njoku. His production speaks for himself. I think he ran his routes well. I think everybody was hoping that he maybe timed a little bit better. Monster game this past fall against the SEC. So if you had questions about that, going, I think 13 for whatever it was, 160 against an SEC team, that's probably the point where you said you shut it up about his athleticism, right? Um, so certainly would be unique player for them and something they could certainly use on this offense. Arroyo has been a guy, and he's been my guy the entire time. I really, really thought he showed well. And one of the reasons, that things that I like is like I like to see a guy who has performed, with the guy. Arroyo did all of this with Cam Ward. Cam Ward certainly about to be the number one overall selection in this draft. Roy was a rough path early in his time at Miami, dinged up a lot, and then certainly just blossomed this past fall. Big, tall, catches everything, really, really athletic. Certainly, I mean, there's not ever been a tight end coming into the NFL where we didn't say, well, he needs a little work with the hand in the dirt, needs a little work being able to pass, but to be able to block, of course, this is all things that we say about every tight end that comes into the NFL. So Arroyo is certainly a nice fit. Mason Taylor, now this is kind of where it gets interesting for me though, because Mason Taylor will not be 21 till about 2 weeks and change after the draft. Okay. Absolute baby. So he will play the entirety of his rookie season at just 21 years old. We know certainly about his father, Jason Taylor, Hall of Famer. But Mason Taylor, who comes from NFL Hall of Fame stock on both sides of his family tree. Zach Thomas, obviously his uncle, Miami Dolphin linebacker. We know his dad is Jason Taylor. He's not even 21 yet. He's big, he's tall, he's athletic, had a really nice year as a contributor with LSU. There were a lot of people that were surprised that maybe he came out when he did, just because, coming out at 20 isn't always the easiest route to go. Maybe if he had stayed in LSU or stayed at LSU for one more year, I mean, could have put himself as a possible, round one type of guy. But for Mason Taylor, he's a really, really fun guy to look at, certainly for this draft class. And, for the Browns, finally addressing, in my opinion, a need that's been there for a few years. And again, it has nothing to do with David Njoku. It just has to do with the fact that he is so good. There's probably a lot of meat left on the bone as far as things what Brown's offense could have done with tight ends, but didn't, because they just didn't really have much talent after David. Um, the question, and I think one of the biggest questions here, and we're not far away. We're going to get the answer on this on either April 24th, somewhere between 10:30 and midnight, or we're going to get the answer on April 25th, probably as the first pick of the second round. Dart, Milroe, Dart, da 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 da. Which way do the Browns go? I will just say publicly, I've heard from a couple of people who believe that Jaxson Dart is someone that the Los Angeles Rams really, really like. As we know, the Rams, Stafford are going to continue this thing. Stafford, it's a tough spot for Stafford because Matt's still got the arm and he's still got an absolute gun. But the question for Matthew Stafford is, where's the rest of the body at this age, in his career, certainly. Um, so certainly the Rams, kind of peeking around the curtain about, hey, what is, life after Matthew Stafford? But I've heard from a couple of people that Jaxson Dart is a player that the Rams really, really like. So if there were interest for the Browns in Jaxson Dart, it certainly would have to be north of the Rams for the Browns if they wanted Dart. I've finally gone one way. I kept leaning Dart versus Milroe, and this is not necessarily my own personal preference. This is more of, how do I see this working out for Cleveland? But I think when we get to it, and there was a great, great video breakdown done by Josh Norris, and I believe Hayden Winks, on Underdog Fantasy, talking about, Jalen Milroe. First off, the 24 fumbles that everybody seems to have their issues with Jalen Milroe. Go back, and Josh Norris highlighted this. 10 of them were some really, really bad snaps. So that kind of cuts that number down. The other is just the running ability. And, not everybody and not every NFL team and not every quarterback with athleticism. And again, you're never comparing a guy to Lamar Jackson. You're never going to do that. It is 110% unfair to take some rookie coming into the league. Just it was unfair to talk about Lamar back in his day and try to put greater expectations on him. He's earned his path. So don't do it to another kid. Let that kid show who they can be. But there is a lot of quarterback run or, things you can do with Jalen Milroe in either A, designed run games or, make it look a little bit like, what the Dolphins were doing with the Wildcat back in the day, because you have that type of running threat at the quarterback position. And that is certainly something Jalen Milroe can give you. If you asked me the speed, I would say sub 4.4. Normally you'd say, well, I don't know if I want to subject, my quarterback to that type of, he's thicker and a hell of a lot thicker than Lamar Jackson. It's not necessarily Lamar's fault. Jalen Milroe just has that kind of tanky, squatty body type, in addition to an extremely strong throwing arm and great feet and long speed and all the things that you would look for. And, I know people don't want to listen when I say it, but I've said for a while, I think there is a legit, there's some legitimacy to the Browns I've been trying to upgrade the athleticism in the quarterback room, which all started with Deshaun Watson and led to subsequent moves at the quarterback position after. Again, Flacco was a break the glass. Winston, again, was a break the glass. He was never supposed to intentionally play. It's just the way it all worked out. But I think it's Milroe. And I think Jalen Milroe is the guy. The Browns like, outside of that pick number two. I pray if that's the way it goes, they can get him at pick 33. The Browns have 10 picks. I honestly feel that they need to make them all. I do. And I know that normally sounds weird for, say, a team needs to take 10 guys in a draft, but you have two running backs that you need. You're drafting at least one quarterback. You're definitely drafting a wide receiver. You're drafting at least a tight end. You're going to draft some sort of offensive lineman, most likely an offensive tackle. You cannot ignore the defense here. Wouldn't, certainly could go edge. You could go defensive tackle, and you could go minimum safety. The Browns have a lot of needs and a lot of holes to fill, and this is a roster that I think Cleveland's working really hard. Again, they don't have to get cheaper. I think they're finding a way and looking for a way to get cheaper because why not? If you can, you can. And if you think you're right there on the precipice or right there on the threshold of chasing a Super Bowl title, then you open up the books and you pay what you got to pay. But there's nothing wrong with getting 10 guys on here on rookie controlled contracts and trying to, simmer down the finances a little bit, which have, certainly been exorbitant and out of control the last few years. And that's all well and good. They know how to work it, they know how to manipulate it. That's all fine. But at the end of the day, you don't need to pay top league salary every single season. And I think that's something that the Cleveland Browns are probably finally looking to rectify and get maybe a little bit under control so that way they can maybe open up the books again in a year or two if there's players that they feel they need to extend or certainly some talent that hits the market that they would have supreme interest in. Again, we thank everybody for coming out every day, reading all the written content over at the Browns over at on the OBR, of course. We appreciate everybody coming out every night here for the Brown Streaming Network. Make sure you're subscribed to the OBR on YouTube. Make sure you're subscribed to the OBR over on Twitch. So, coming in, getting your nightly fill. Like I said, you'll have the React with Brad and Pete Smith after this. You will have Mike Keefe after that with the Garage Beers podcast. And again, we thank you all. We're getting closer and closer. Looking forward to it. Make sure you join us in some capacity as we stream the entire 2025 NFL draft. This has been Browns 3D on the OBR, and it has been brought to you by State Sharpening, Mower Sales, and Service. This has been your daily delivery of all things dog pound. Browns 3D on the OBR, and we will talk to you all tomorrow.